God bless you. Welcome to Twigg and Jenkins, man.
Thank you for being here.
No,
thanks for having me. Yeah, let's do this.
Let's go. Folks may not know, Nate just announced his candidacy for DNC Chair with a fucking Reuters piece. Mm-hmm. Great article. Tell us, let's get into it. Nate and I also, disclaimer, Nate and I have known each other for years. One of my favorite people in Washington, D.C.
15 years? 16 years?
Nate Snyder is a fucking legend. Vegas Obama caucus legend.
Well, Vegas Mirage Caucus floor. We can maybe talk.
Get into
we
that.
could get into that.
Get into it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Obama Vegas legend, but also one of, when you told me you're thinking of it, I got so excited because I'm like, there are very few people who have your background, who are fired up, who could bring such enthusiasm to the Democratic Party. So I'm obviously in the tank, but very fired up, Nate. Very fired up.
Brad's bringing up a really important distinction about us here at Twigg and Jenkins, which is we are not journalists.
No.
Yeah, no.
Impartiality? What is that?
Yeah. No, I'll tell that. I love it.
Tell us. No, but tell us why you're doing it, man. Let's go. Let's
Look, I think we all saw what happened in November. We were talking about that just before, pre-talk and stuff like that. Yeah. And we're all still reeling from it. We're trying to figure out what happened, why did it happen? But I think it did a few things for us. It sort of expedited us to really look under hood, kick the tires, and just ask ourselves the fundamental questions, like how and why did this happen?
Yeah.
I mean, let's not sugarcoat this.
Yeah.
We got beat by a convicted sexual predator totalitarian.
Yeah.
Authoritarian. Like, that should not happen, period. And so when that did happen, we're like, look, okay, now we need to find some answers. And so I had been serving in the Biden administration back at Homeland Security. I had served under the Obama administration for 8 years. And so I hadn't been really sort of neck deep in sort of like the campaign world or the political world. I was working in national security. But even from that perch, you could see certain things. So one of the things that I really focused on when I was at the department was focusing on like domestic violent extremism, all the groups that unfortunately popped up when Obama won, because to them, their greatest fear had happened.
Yep.
And then we saw that uptick. And then obviously with Trump, that just opened up the floodgates and allowed this behavior to spread even further and metastasize. And so you would also see that now starting to rear its head in our politics.
Yeah.
So you'll see people now who are at the local level, and we're seeing all the horrible headlines of like kids being bullied by other moms of kids in school. You're seeing the targeting of, folks from the LGBTQ plus community. You're seeing obviously the targeting of immigrants and all these policies that are being pushed out on sort of, whether it's reproductive right bans, whether it's banning books. We could just go on for days. But it's these very same folks who I was looking at and sort of fighting from my perch in the national security world that's now manifesting itself into our politics.
Yeah.
And so if we don't really take a hard look and nip this in the bud, we're going to be dealing with folks who have very extreme agendas. And it's not just going to be cycle per cycle.
Sure.
We're talking decades. And it all happens at the grassroots level. Once you get in, then you go up that ladder.
Yep.
And then you go from what may be dog catcher one day to then you find yourself, hey, I'm actually running for mayor for a major city, or I may be running for governor, and then that's it. So it's like we either got to fight and have an intervention now, or we're going to be dealing with some very sinister things, in my point of view, for years to come.
Wow, that's so interesting. It's funny because all of these candidates have not brought this up once. I mean, I will say this, and I'm curious, like, what do you make of, because there must have been something that spurred you to want to run, right? Because we've been around this stuff for so long.
Exactly.
Like, what, there's clearly, you're seeing the field and you're like, you know what? There's something missing here.
Exactly. So I think, it's a couple of things. One, I think many you've heard them talk about like values. And so that's kind of like where I'm rooted, sort of like growing up from working class beginnings, went through the American dream, et cetera. I think my story is very unique and can only happen in this country. So let me just quickly give you sort of like the foundation there, and then I'll get directly into it and sort of like what was that opening. And I was like, I need to do this.
Yeah.
So I mean, I was born in La Paz, Bolivia. I was adopted as an infant by 2 Jewish parents, one from South Philly, my dad, and my mom from Pittsburgh. She's a Yinzer. He's a Philly guy.
Oh my
so
God,
you
I
probably
love that you got Pittsburgh and Philly.
and Philly.
Right?
Let's go already, Nate.
So you'll probably hear me say things like "wooder" and stuff like
There
that.
you go.
So like that's in there. But I remember growing up. I mean,
Where did you grow up, by the way?
I grew up in. As a kid, I moved very early. I was in Sicklerville, New Jersey. So I got Jersey ties a little bit. And like growing up there as a kid, we had neighbors who worked at like the sugar plant in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
My next door neighbor was in the Coast Guard. And, you know, we had, you know, my dad is a social worker, my mom a librarian. And so sort of like those working, you know, values, you know, not necessarily, you know, making sure that there's an opportunity for others, but making sure that, you know, when you're in a position to where you can uplift others, you do it.
Yeah.
So that then I moved to Delaware, Biden country.
Yeah.
I spoke in my high school for about 2 hours.
Yeah, sounds right.
True. By the way, that's not an exaggeration.
It's not an exaggeration.
Yeah, sounds exactly right.
It was during my graduation, so I can't really tell you what he said.
Yeah.
But the things of, ladies and gentlemen, literally no malarkey. Like that was there. And so, you know, that continued. And so when I graduated and went to college and stuff like that, those followed me on a path of like, I want to get involved in politics. I want to help people improve their lives. And then that led to me joining the labor movement and literally fighting for people's livelihood. But the key distinction, it wasn't me. It was empowering people to do that on their own.
Yeah.
And so then when it came to another point of sort of serving and instilling these values, and I got the call, you know, when we worked for the Obama campaign, I mean, granted, winning had never crossed my mind. I had been on so many losing presidential campaigns. I was so used to like, okay, I know what to do. I'm going to go home, go to an unemployment office. They know me by name, and I'll collect my benefits, and I'll get back on my feet and jump on another race. I had a full freak out in Gary, Indiana. That's where I was when it was announced. And I was like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
I'm used to losing, and I know how to do that. Winning is a completely new ballgame. So what does my future hold? And so I went into DHS, and it was a different level of serving, you know, still fighting for those values, but in my point of view, protecting them.
Yeah.
And protecting the American people. And granted, DHS still got a long way to go, but it's on a lot better track now than was. I'm quite fearful on what's going to happen now in this administration. But then that leapfrogs into what's just now happened. I'm looking at these same things over a career of 25 years, fighting for in some fashion or form. And the national security alarm in my head is going, we're at a precipice to where we need to protect these things. It's all hands on deck.
Yeah.
It's we can't do things as normal. And we need a crisis manager. And having gone through some of the worst crises in national security, whether it's responding to the Boston bombing attack, whether it's dealing with the wildfires in Maui, you know, the litany, unfortunately, of gun violence and mass shootings. And then, you know, one of the proudest things that I worked on, and it just, I get a little teared up about it, is Operation Allies Welcome. This was one moment that brought people together because we were evacuating our Afghan allies who had helped our troops, who had, you know, served rightfully, and we're getting them heck out of there. And so we moved just under 100,000 people very quickly, brought them to the States, made sure that they were taken care of, and literally saved their lives.
Yeah.
And so that was probably my proudest moment this go around of doing it, of leading a team across the country to be the eyes and ears and making sure that they were getting what they needed, and then working with the communities outside to bring resources to help the families. So like in Indiana, they had this thing called Hoosier Hospitality that we put together. And so you had churches, synagogues, mosques, and various others come together and like make sure that people felt welcome in the new environment. So that was great. But yeah, that's my viewpoint right now is, sure, we can go along and do sort of like the things we're used to. And like, we're just going to pick it up like next cycle, and Virginia and New Jersey around the corner, and we're going to go hard at it. Well, that's great. But I think what we saw here is some of the assumptions that we've had rooted in how we conduct our politics and how we organize needs a reassessment. And it needs a reassessment just on not do more organizing or having like a master plan, but we need to ask the tough questions, and we need to really go in and have a soul searching conversations with ourselves on who are we as a party, and then what is this new environment we're dealing with, because the tactics we're using are tactics we've used for over a decade. And look, if there's any evidence out there, they're not working anymore. So it's, we are at a crisis moment. And nobody's talking like that, nor, and to give them the benefit of the doubt, I don't think they've had experience in doing that. I unfortunately or fortunately have. And so we're at a reckoning point.
So I have a bunch of different questions about everything that you just said. One,
Same.
the work that you do is obviously has been extraordinarily important. Like, how do you think that the DNC and the role of the DNC chair uniquely furthers the work and the concerns that you actually have? So I think there's that, right? Like, why not go be the head of a think tank and do that work? Why not go be a head of a philanthropy dedicated to that work? Why the DNC chair if that's your chief concern? And then I would also love to hear about your experience at the ASDC meeting in Arizona.
Yeah.
And then third, I would love, you just said that, there's obvious assumptions that we've made that are incorrect. Like, name one. I have a long list of assumptions that I think that we've made that are wildly incorrect. I've named a bunch of them on this pod. But I would love like a very specific thing. Everyone is sort of really reluctant. I think Brad and I talk about this a lot, that you can say something was we did a bad job without saying that person is bad, right? It's like not about, I love everyone who ran this campaign. I also think there were a ton of mistakes made, and those were decisions made by individual people. Doesn't mean they're bad, right? So like there's a lack of specificity, I think, when we're talking about this stuff. And I would love like a really
so I'll just mention
specific thing.
Something real quick, just so it's a place marker, so I remember these things, but also so you remember too. We may want to talk about Dunkerque, if you read that article. So talking about a missed assumption where things went wrong, that's like a prime example, but we'll get into it. But where you mentioned on sort of like, okay, being the head of the DNC, like what does that mean? And like, how does that manifest itself in the things that I'm talking about? So I think it's a re-envisioning of what the role of a DNC chair should be. Traditionally, the DNC has played mostly a financial role. And so when you're talking about think tanks or philanthropy, yes, DNC gets active, you raise a bunch of money, you make sure it gets out to the states in some fashion or form. And it's a very top-down approach, and it's almost like a transactional one. There's not a lot of staying power, and just sort of like, we're going to ramp up the DNC every 2 to 4 years. There's going to be money changing hands. It's maybe going to go to states. Maybe it's going to go to contracts. Who knows? And then afterwards, we're going to lay off a bunch of people, and then DNC is only going to be a shell until it's back up again. And so, you could do those things, obviously, in the philanthropy sector. You could also do it in think tanks and things of that, on pushing policy. But I think the DNC really needs to rethink of itself as sort of like the chief operator of operations within the party, thinking about like, what are we looking at to build infrastructure? This isn't going to be the sexy stuff. So by no means do I think the DNC should be like the face or spokesperson of the Democratic Party. We've got people out there who are so much better and more in tune with that. You're talking about your Whitmers, your Westmores, you know, even folks who are even in a new class that are coming out. Those are the folks, and what the DNC needs to get behind to amplify, provide shared resources, provide infrastructure, and provide institutionalization to supporting the states so that infrastructure stays. Because we've all been through campaigns where it's just like, we built this really awesome system and network and relationships in whatever battleground state that we're in, and then you say your sad goodbyes, and then you're gone. And then people are like, wait a second, we did a good thing. We want this to keep going, and we're going to need it probably in the next 2 years. Sorry, I got to go. Funding's over. Talk to your local party. And the local party's even like, I got no funding. We can't keep this going, but stay in touch, and maybe we'll call you as a volunteer in about a year and a half. And so a lot of what a DNC chair should be is looking at those structures, looking at how we're funding, providing more visibility to where that funding's going, making sure there's a return on investment, and that's based on outcomes. And so it's very much, previously just leaving DHS, I was the chief of staff for one of the secretary's major offices, his engagement office specifically. And I did that. I had to go through, look at all of our contracts, look how we're spending, look almost, I guess here's the analogy, if you're a Trekkie or even just like a sci-fi nerd, you know what that role is? You're either Geordie LaForge or you're Scotty on the Enterprise.
You're talking Twigg's language here.
So,
Twigg is...
the captain...
nerd El Clasico.
Yeah, okay, so we can go there. Yeah. And I can switch between Star Trek, Star Wars. I'm dangerous.
Listen,
I'm dangerous.
I'm right with you.
But, here's the thing. The captains in this is not the DNC. The captains are at the states and the people who are actually leading the fight. And it's the Geordie LaForges and the Scotties who are responding, I'm going to give him more power. I'm going to give him all I got. I'm going to make sure we get through this at warp speed and we do it well and the ship is maintained.
Can I ask a question about that, though?
Yes.
Because I also think that you're right. We have so much talent in the States. We have so many up-and-comers. Westmore, huge fan of his. Gretchen, so on. We have got talent for days.
Yeah.
There is also, I think, a role of the DNC chair specifically to pick fights that keep our candidates a little bit clean.
Yep.
Like, we are working in a environment that is highly adversarial, that is highly partisan, that requires us to say some really pointed and adversarial, aggressive things that I actually don't want Westmore to be on record saying. I don't know that we need our governor base or our potential presidential candidates to be out kicking Republicans in the teeth and holding them accountable for all the fuckery that's about to ensue.
Yeah.
And I very much view that as the DNC chair's role. Like, it is your job to be dirty, to be shisty, to be like drawing attention and drawing a contrast in a way that actually that runs interference and coverage for this base that we need to be statesmen.
Yep. But I would agree with that. That also goes back to that sort of being the one to sort of like be that pointy object to go ahead. And sometimes, it doesn't behoove candidates or those who are running to have sort of that knockdown, down the trenches, sort of like hand-to-hand combat, if you will. But I think that also comes with the information. So like the DNC needs to be a central piece that shares information with those candidates, whether, look, we're talking about going into a new environment. Mis and disinformation, huge right now. Are we going to see that ramp up to levels we've never seen before? Yes. But is there a place to where candidates to say, okay, I need to go on the offensive or I'm getting attacked? What's real? DNC, can you give me that information? We can do research. We can do sort of like the data and then arm people with that so they can fight well in this environment, because it is going to be asymmetrical. It is going to be complex, and you're going to get gaslit left and right. And so you're going to need to know where the ground truth is. I think the DNC should help with that and be that repository for information to share across the states. But also, yes, I think sometimes, people do need to keep their hands clean a little bit. And the DNC is equipped, to come in and say, we want to pick this fight because it's a fight worth having. But I would say, let's pick that fight, but also arm those with information that we can win it.
Yeah. Twigg asked 3 questions. I'm sorry, because I'm stepping in mid. So let's not forget the other 2 questions.
Yeah.
But I want to, this is a really interesting question, because here's my feeling on this whole thing. I think that the Democratic Party as a brand might be the worst brand in America. But at the same time, there are incredible humans whose brand is very high, right? So you have someone like an AOC, you have someone like a Big Gretch, you have someone like a Wes, who people like them. But if you're like, well, what about the Democratic Party? It's like, oh, fuck the Democratic Party. Yeah. And I think that I like what Nate's saying, because one thing that we do not do a good job of, and I think, look, as Obama people, we can take a little bit of responsibility with this too, because this was the central tension between Obama for America
and DNC.
Organizing for America in the DNC, we
That's
had
right.
this historic, transformational moment where you had all these young people fired up about politics, fired up about public service, not fired up about the Democratic Party.
That's right. That's right.
At all. Fired up about Obama. And we became sort of a cult of personality. I find ourselves, we're still operating in this either or. And, you know, how do we fundamentally shift? How do we create some how do we start to wrap our arms around all of these great communicators? And the other part, I would include someone like Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders, who doesn't even claim the Democratic Party. I would include Bernie. I would include Elizabeth Warren, right? Like, how does that work? The last thing I'll say before I'll forget, all of the candidates so far have, you know, we saw Ben on the Daily Show. We spoke to Governor yesterday. Ken also. The central thesis is like, we got to talk about the economy. We got to talk about the economy. We got to talk about the economy. Democrats have lost their way. I want to say, and this is, I'm just going to get fired up here. Joe Biden's been talking about the economy for 4 years.
Yeah.
Not sure if any of those guys noticed.
Yeah. Bidenomics.
Bidenomics, y'all. He came up with a thing. It didn't really catch on. You know what I mean? But like, we've been talking about the economy.
We've been talking about the economy.
So, you know, just let's put that in a bucket. And I think that there's been almost a false choice of saying, you know, the idea that Democrats or the left have become too woke. We've been talking about the marginalized communities that you're discussing and sort of pushing them aside to be like, we need to get back to like white people. We need to get back to like the working class. You didn't say the economy. So you're the first person we've spoken to. You're saying something very different. You're talking about extremism. You're talking about hate. You're talking about, you know, the thing that I am thinking of when you're saying this is mass deportations.
Yeah.
How, as a party that refuses to even bring up immigration during the convention, how do we organize collectively around what's about to happen?
So I could wax poetic on this for days. I'll try to keep it short. But I think it really gets down to, like, we as Democrats have been very vociferous about talking about process. We love talking about process, and we love talking about policy. So yes, while we're talking about economic policy and economic process, how good we are on passing legislation, we got to get back to talking like encompassing values. And that can be inclusive. So, I mean, when you mention the big thing that a lot of communities are worried about on you know, mass deportation, and one of the things going, you know, Carrie, back to one of your questions on like one of the things that we could have done better. So I'm trying to bring it together.
Good. Sorry.
We're all over the shop.
You're throwing a lot at you.
It's cool.
We're relatively new at this.
But I think one of the things when we were talking about border security, immigration, and we were talking about, I mean, literally during the campaign and even during the administration, is like, who's the toughest on border security? We're trying to out-tough one another.
Yeah.
But we didn't really look at the fact when we were talking specifically to Latino communities, we were leading with that. We were leading with immigration. We were leading with border security.
Yep.
And we weren't talking about things like education. We weren't talking about things like pension protection. We weren't talking about things about putting food on the table. We weren't talking about healthcare and things that people are dealing with a day-to-day basis. And so when you're looking at what I would call sort of working family values, you know, when it comes to the Latino community, they're interchangeable. And so you're not necessarily saying, hey, Latino community, and this is part of our politics, and just having worked in them, we all find ourselves in the conversations, you know, whether we're talking about GOTV or just coming up with our magic 270 number of like, okay, we got the Latino voting electorate here. We have, you know, voting educated white women, you know, under 40, they're over here. Then we have white males. Then we have, you know, black women. And it's just sort of like we're segmenting and we're intentionally putting people in their own little segments to try and build this puzzle. Sure, there's operationally, and you're talking about targeting and data, that kind of makes sense. But it'd be an easier conversation of like saying, okay, who are the people who are worried about putting food on the table?
Yeah.
Who are worried about, making sure that they can afford groceries, or they can pay back their student loans, or, these are values that I think that are transferable and they're transcending. And so if we get back to that and we can talk at it at a level to where it's actually tangible to people, I think where we really went sideways this time around, we were talking about the economy until we were blue in the face. But you know what we were talking about? We were talking about the market. Like, look at this. S&P 500 through the roof. We are killing it. Economy is back. Jobs report, super great. A lot of those jobs were like, through the, bit economy and various other things. So they're not lasting jobs. So the numbers were saying that. But then you're trying to say this to somebody. And this was a story going back to some of my conversations in Arizona. Somebody shared with me a party chair. She said, hey, and I believe she said it was her stylist. Either way, it was, a working families person, and said, hey, I remember the economy when I had $100 in my pocket and I could walk into Costco and I would leave with 4 bags full of groceries. Now I go to Costco with that same $100, I get 2. And so if you're telling somebody, hey, the economy's great, but you can't stretch that 100 like you could before, you're losing the argument.
Massive decline of
massive
purchasing
decline
power.
Exactly. And so that's where I think a lot of people who, in our own assumptions, until it was sort of like really given a rude awakening, we're like, working families, Democrats, our base, they're going to understand the economy. They're going to see that it's better. But the fact that we lost that sight on that individual not being able to afford groceries, from going from 4 bags to 2, no, we're not going to be able to convince her that, you know what, you're better off. No, that's the thing.
But that dynamic, you're right, and I want to talk a little bit about your union background in a minute. But there were endless articles, there were endless leaks talking about how voters did not feel that the economy was in a good place regardless of the numbers. I mean, going back, we were talking as we were walking in that the last time you two saw each other was the Obama reunion in Chicago. Obviously massive leaks out of the Obama reunion in Chicago about how concerned everyone was about the lack of infrastructure in the campaign, the lack of organization in the campaign, lack of focus and direction.
Were you guys at that? You were at that
briefing. And
I didn't go.
I have not been at a political thing where I got more text messages from people in the room. I mean, my phone was lit up. People were just like, what the hell are they talking about? Like, it felt so out of touch even then, right? So then you have all these massive leaks coming out from November all the way through February and March from President Obama having lunch with President Biden and talking about how concerned he is for the campaign, how they're not being organized, how they're not. I asked for another coffee because I need to jack myself up.
Can I get another one too? Thanks. Sorry.
This is real life. This is real life on the pod.
Trying to hide
Twigg and Jenkins, real life.
I'd love
we need
another
caffeine.
one as well. Thank you.
Don't worry. Nothing will suspend my rant.
No. Just keep it going. Keep it rolling.
Yeah. Great. It's great content. Thank you so much.
Nate, would you like a coffee?
I'm good.
You're good. Okay.
Yeah. Water's fine.
And so I find it especially egregious and like borderline offensive in the aftermath of the campaign to be like, there were all these headwinds, we didn't know. Like, people have been shouting from the rooftops for a year about the fact that the messaging wasn't working, that we were not sufficiently connecting the dots, we were not doing enough work with our base, we were not building the infrastructure in a way that made sense, we were not participating in culture in a way that made sense, over and over and over again. So like, I'm not trying to hear these excuses.
Nope.
And we made the choices we made, and we're in the boat we're in, fine. But like, how are you, whoever's the next DNC chair, like, how are you disrupting this echo chamber that exists where we pretend as though it's in some way acceptable that a bunch of people know what the answer is and we're not listening to them?
You're just winding me up. You can probably tell. So this will go into what you were asking about, sort of my union background. So started organizing early, and I had just left South Dakota. I was out there working on Tim Johnson's race. We beat John Thune by 524 votes.
Yeah.
Like talking about grassroots, like rural, old school organizing. Like, yeah, baby.
I love it.
Yeah. So like coming hot off of that, and I graduated from Syracuse University, so that's where I went back to Syracuse, and I went to go join an SEIU local, and went there, did some old school organizing. We organized janitors, long-term healthcare workers, teachers, and those who deal with those who may have other sort of long-term disabilities. And so you're talking about solid earth people. And so that rooted into me on like what we were fighting for. We were fighting for livelihoods. And the difference between electoral campaigns and union campaigns, sure, after an election, you get to go home and you know what, you could probably still afford to pay your bills and not much changes. It will maybe in the long run. You lose an organizing drive.
Yeah, it's devastating.
It's devastating. People get fired and they actually do lose their livelihoods.
Yeah.
And it's that stark. So like the stakes are that much higher. So going through that experience and then working for SEIU at a national level, then fast forward to like 05 to 07, you get attuned to where you can hear what people are saying. And I'll go back forward to this. Not just a year ago, people have been saying, hey, Democrats, you're losing sight of this.
Yeah.
And I love our Obama fam to death, but they've been saying this since like 12, if not sooner. And it goes back to just the culture and the way the party and the DNC has operated in the past, to where it's like, and we've all been there. An election comes up, things are neck and neck at the wire. We need more funding. Who do we go to? We go to the labor unions.
Yeah.
Labor unions, we need you.
Yeah.
You're the ATM for the party. And then when you look at it back, when I was an organizer, I would reach out to legislators in Albany and Poughkeepsie and Syracuse when I was up there. And I would say, we got an organizing drive. We're trying to organize about 200 Head Start teachers here in Poughkeepsie.
Yeah.
We need you to intervene and come talk to this employer and make sure that they're honest, negotiate for card check to make sure that these they can get recognized as a union. And we also need you to strive for neutrality, which is just basically the employer's going to stay out, because these people have a right. And if you're on the right side of things and you say you're for working families and you're for these values, now's the time for you to step up. And for so long, we have not seen that from the party.
Yeah.
I mean, I love Joe Biden to death,
Agreed.
but what did he do? He walked on a picket line. And to be the first president to work on a picket line,
Ever.
I'll applaud him for that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, too, that's the lowest form of intervention you can do.
Yeah.
And so many times when I was on the ground fighting for working families, you would just get, hey, I'm with you, I'm for you, let me know how it goes.
Right.
You have an opportunity and you have a responsibility. If that's part of your platform as a Democrat, to get involved, protect these workers, make sure that they form their union. Don't tell me as organizers, good luck to you, kid, come back to me, and then I'm going to get their vote. That's not how this works.
Yeah.
And so that's been happening
Preach,
for
bro.
years
Oh,
and
shit.
years and years and years.
Yes.
And now we're surprised.
Yes.
We're surprised that this is happening. No, it's called 90% of organizing is showing up and listening.
Yeah.
We've forgotten how to listen. We're definitely not hearing what people are saying because they've been saying this. You talk to any organizer on the ground, you talk to any Labor International, and they will tell you their members have been screaming this.
Yes.
And they've been organizing. And when they ask, and they're not asking for a handout, they're asking for an opportunity. And they're asking for the Democratic Party, are you going to show up, or are you just going to carry a sign for us?
Oof. Preach.
It's so true. So I don't know if you know this, but I did the labor unions in the White House for many years after Nate Tamron, and I did it on the 2012 campaign. And it's like, this is my rant that I subject Brad to
you
all
are
the
broing
time.
out. By the way, the two of you are broing out so hard right now over the lack of commitment and urgency and how we dropped the ball. And it started with Obama dropping the ball with labor unions.
I mean, listen, we can pull this thread for a long time.
We can go to NAFTA.
right?
I mean, we can go back to Clinton.
We can go back to
NAFTA.
Bush
We go back to
one.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Bush one, Clinton
I
signing
mean, it
NAFTA,
started with
so on and so
Obama,
forth.
meaning like we were there and witnessed it.
Our era.
Yes.
Yes,
Our
for
era,
sure,
era, for
for
sure.
sure. But, you know, one of the other things that makes my eyes twitch when with stress and rage when I hear people talk about the Democratic Party, especially in this moment, is like, we need to focus on white working class voters. And it's like, you know what? The proxy for white working class voters has been in the Democratic Party for a generation, multiple generations, has been unions. And you've hung them out to dry every chance you got.
Yes.
Maybe not SEIU.
No.
But we have lost the respect of the building trades.
Yeah.
We have lost the respect of the carpenters.
That's
We have
right.
lost the
That's
respect
right.
of so many of the AFL-CIO affiliates around the country, to the extent that they're not even endorsing us anymore. You have the president of the Teamsters speaking at the Republican National Convention.
that was
like, that trajectory has been going on for so long. For the firefighters not to endorse is insane. In the Harold Shapeberger era, like they would have been the first ones to endorse.
Yeah.
And so, like, this concept of like, we have no inroads to, it's like, because we've abandoned
figure
them.
out how to reach white working class people. How do we do it?
It's not even that. I mean, this is systemic.
Yes.
And I told you from my perspective as an organizer when, you know, you were literally like, hey, good luck, kid.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's also the message through our policies as a party that we've been putting through. I mean, just look what happened. We bailed out the banks.
Yeah.
Right. The pandemic, right? We're hearing millions of people crying out that these social nets that were protecting the institutions that we as Democrats were proud about, devastated.
Yeah.
And so then you have people of all shapes, sizes, and colors saying, help, I can't pay my bills, I'm in debt, I've had to mortgage my house, I have rising healthcare costs because I have relatives who got sick, or maybe now that they have long COVID. And now you're telling me everything's great and America's back?
Yeah.
No. And so instead of doing that, what do? We put in policies that then bail out, again, corporates, those who are part of healthcare and various other things. And again, people are not asking for a handout. They're asking just to get back on their feet.
Yeah.
And if we're going to stay true to our values as Democrats, then where the hell have we been? Like that right there is sort of a trajectory. And if we're saying we're surprised that people are leaving the party and going to test out water somewhere else, I mean, granted, you know, Trump is who he is, but his message was very clear.
Yeah.
Things are terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I myself will make them better for you.
Yeah.
He didn't say how. It's very clear he doesn't have any plans.
Yeah.
But
when did we care about that anyway? I mean, if voters cared about plans, Elizabeth Warren would be president.
She would. But at the same time, too, when you're in those dire straits where you're just like, I can't take care of all these and I'm being told help is coming, but it's been 4 years. No. Yeah. It's been 20 years and I still haven't seen that help. I'm going to go somewhere else. And this guy says he's going to fight for me. What do I have to lose?
Yeah.
And I think that's not a white voter working class issue. It's not a black voter working class issue or a Latino working class issue. That right there is just sort of the core of what we lost because we haven't been walking the walk for so long. And when it comes time to fighting for folks like this, we've sort of said, you're okay.
Yeah.
Just rub some dirt on it. You'll be fine.
Yeah. Hot, spicy take that. I mean, Democrats have just been gaslighting people.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. But it's also, I also think
annoying.
it's the Johnny come lately pundits and journalist class too, who look at exit polls and who come to a conclusion that this is just materialized overnight, that this hasn't been wrought. Right.
Well, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
It's like our messaging has remained in alignment with like working class values.
Yes.
But it's not materializing in people's actual lived conditions.
Yes.
And so they're just like, quit trying to sell me this shit.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like I'm not buying it anymore.
Yeah.
Like we've broken trust with so many constituencies.
It just sounds
why they're
like
peeling
bullshit.
them off.
It just sounds like platitudes and talking points. So wait, talk about Arizona. You were there. When was this?
The
last
ASDC
week?
meeting, the Association of State Democratic Party chairs met in Tucson, Arizona. We've talked about it a little bit.
Scottsdale.
Yeah.
Scottsdale. And so this is kind of like, in a way, this is kind of the launch of the campaign, right? Because all the chair candidates were there. Were they all there?
Yeah.
Or most of them were there?
They were all there.
Yeah.
So, and yeah, I think you're completely right.
And it's the biggest block of voters.
It's the biggest block of voters, right?
For the audience.
I left the Department of Homeland Security on Thursday.
Great.
Granted, being in that position, I was severely restricted on what my political activity would be. Very, very strict. So having conversations with potential DNC members, having conversations about platforms and various other things, I couldn't have.
Right.
Period. And so when I made the decision, I was like, look, I've seen the coverage. I've had conversations with close friends, pre-existing relationships, by the way, for any attorneys who are listening.
Sure.
So I was like, okay, I got this crazy idea, but if I'm really going to jump into the deep end, I got to leave. So sort of like a proving point was like I had an idea in my head basically around what we're talking about right now.
Yeah.
And I saw this as an opening and I was like, why the hell not? Let's go for broke. And then went down, literally left DHS Thursday mid-afternoon, hopped on a plane early evening that Thursday, and then flew down to Scottsdale, Arizona. And granted, I probably didn't get the biggest sample size that I would have gotten had I gone earlier in the week, but I was prohibited from doing that. So I did have a great opportunity to have just, I'm not pitching myself. I'm not trying to say like, hey, I'm the new guy and I'm crashing the party. But I was like, look, I haven't been in this ecosystem for a while, but I'm familiar with it. And I ran into people who I hadn't seen in 15 or 20 years.
Yeah.
Some old Obama, Nevada people.
Oh, yeah.
Who were there. I was like, oh, hey, how's it going? They're like, what are you doing here? Aren't you fighting, domestic terrorism right now? I was like, I was, but now I'm here.
But it's all fine now.
It's all fine. We're great.
We solved it.
It's taken care of.
Yeah.
And so the conversations were really eye-opening. I wasn't sitting in the presentations that were given, I was basically kind of crashing the lobby and whatever and catching up with some really good friends who it's great to be connected with. But the sort of aura within that whole entire convention area was just one of shell shock. Two, there were presentations showing how dire some of the situations have been. Granted, there were some gains in some areas, so I don't want to discount that.
Sure.
And so there was that glimmer of hope people were hanging on to, but pretty much a mentality of like, well, sure, we do need to shake things up and need to question some things, but I'm not sure we want to completely rock the boat here.
Yeah.
Because if we do, it's going to get messy. We're going to have it's going to force us to have hard conversations that maybe we're not comfortable with having. And maybe we'll just kind of lick our wounds and go into the next cycle and we'll figure it out. And some of the conversations too were just like, look, we really like, the two people we're most familiar with, and we have their respect, their, tacticians in the
Ken
party. Yeah, Ken and Ben. And we know them, they know us.
Yeah.
And we feel confident that they can fight for us from being from a state party chair community and understanding what our needs are. But then I had an eye-opening conversation with a number of people, and I said, look, that's great, and that's party politics, but why don't we look at the existential question here is right now the states, local politics, and campaigns, you all are the front line for preserving and fighting for our democracy. Extremist agendas are coming forward. You know what they are. You're hearing them in your backyards.
Yeah.
If we don't beat these people now, it's going to be on us. And we're going to be dealing with this for years on end. But those are the consequences. It's not win some, lose some, we'll figure it out and we'll go on to the next cycle. This is literally talking about a threat to our democracy and what we as a country and our foundation and our principles are going to be in the future. And so when you bring it in those kinds of stark terms to the people who are going to do their work, terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're like, I had not thought of it in that kind of context. Granted, being you, Nate, from a national security level, you clearly have thought about this. But now that I think of it in these terms, I'm not sure I have the resources that I need to have that fight. And while I do have relationships with people who know who I am, I'm not sure if just tweaking things, doing more organizing, or having a magic bullet sort of plan that's going to answer all this is going to do what needs to get done. And we're not comfortable yet to sounding the alarms. And that was it for me. Then I was like, okay, if you're not going to sound the alarm because you don't feel comfortable, that's on you. And you need to maintain your relationships. I don't want to discount sort of that at all. But if I have the ability to raise the alarms, to force the tough conversations and say business as usual just ain't going to cut it anymore, I'll be that guy. And so, going into it, it was insightful. But it also sheds light on we as a party, like we're not a fall in line party, and we do much better when we have that knockdown, drag out fight, and we need to have it.
Yeah, I agree.
But the reluctance there to have it is, granted, talking about crisis, I've seen this all the time, to where you're in a crisis and you're not sure where to go, you're not sure what direction to go into, and you go to that point of comfort. And that's kind of, I think, where we're at right now.
Do you identify... I'm getting fired up about your candidacy, Nate, because there's a couple things. Is one, speaking from a couple of unicorns here, Rainbow Coalition, you gotta love the Latino Jew in the mix.
Indigenous Latino Jew.
Indigenous Latino Jew.
Way to kick it up a notch.
From Delaware.
Yes. Who fights domestic terrorism. That is a fucking great little log line here.
That's a Venn diagram winner.
That's a beautiful Venn diagram.
I check a lot of boxes on the van.
Fucking
I
boxes.
check a lot of boxes.
But, and more importantly, a union guy.
Yeah.
Because I think this is something that's not come up in a lot of conversations. How do you imagine the Democratic Party? Because, look, the DNC has always had to take their cues from the White House. This is just the way things work. I remember, our guy, I love Sam Cornell, spoke to his team because I was like, what is the DNC doing on branding? What is the DNC doing on communications? And I talked to their team. And not to be mean, but I talked to their team and they're just like, we just do whatever Biden tweets. Like, that was their answer. Their answer was like, we don't really have a point of view when it comes to this stuff, right? So if Biden is talking about Bidenomics, that's what the DNC is talking about.
Yep.
Well, guess what? We don't have a President Biden anymore. We don't have a head of the Democratic Party anymore, absent Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. Those three aside, Twigg is making some head motions, which is interesting.
Well,
those
that's
three
why the
aside,
D-Trip and the DS exist. Like, they're not going to be the head of the DNC.
Yeah,
exactly. What does, because I love this idea of a reimagining of our relationship with labor, which is also something none of the other chair candidates have talked about. What does that look like? Like, what this is like. What labor leaders need on the ground. Like what, I think you're right. A lot of this is just shutting the fucking up and listening. But what do you think labor leaders want from the Democratic Party right now?
Action, and showing up. It's pretty simple. Like I said, you have people who tout a working family's agenda.
Yeah.
That's great. But like when the fight actually comes to head, showing up.
Yeah.
Showing up and not only staying true to those values, but seeking action with them. And what do I mean by that is like, whether it's resources, whether it's, working with labor to lower the threshold for those in locals who want to run for office.
Yeah. Yeah.
Start recruiting. There is a very healthy culture within labor of making sure that you're training member political organizers, making sure that they have opportunities to be active and building political power. There's not that relationship yet, or there was at one point, that is now atrophied on saying, okay, Democratic Party, okay, labor, we're going to form a partnership here that, yes, we are going to lower a threshold and help candidates with a labor background who are smart and savvy to run in their communities. We're going to give them that background and we're going to help incubate these folks.
I love that.
And that goes back
pipeline for candidates.
Well, candidates, that's how you start.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we're talking about, at least from SEIU, and that's my background.
Yeah.
If you can get a fired up long-term care registered nurse to run,
Yeah.
and she's going to be able to talk about healthcare, she's going to be talking about all these various other things, and just through what she does, knows her community, why aren't we running that person?
Yeah.
Instead, we're always looking through the data points, which are important. You need data to give you some assumption sort of guidelines here. But we're always looking to, like, who's the perfect candidate that's going to fit in this spreadsheet? Like, we've become very good at winning spreadsheets and not necessarily saying, you know what, this person's saying something different. They're saying the right things. Let's put this person up. Instead, we've sort of become this risk averse. Let's only do it if the data shows.
Yeah.
And so some of those things, you know, we need to get back to. But I would say that a partnership, for one, making sure that resources are going to lower the threshold, and then making sure there's a level of accountability, you know, with Democrats who are in office. If you're going to say you're going to support a working families platform, you need to be in the fight. So those days of where I was getting shunned on just saying, good luck, kid, let us know how it happens, and then you show up.
Yeah.
No. If you're getting funding from the DNC to support and promote a working families agenda, there's got to be a level of accountability that you need to show up. We don't have that.
I couldn't agree more.
Taking the question I thought you were going to ask, which is around the branding. What do you think the brand of the Democratic Party should be, and what are some specific tactics you think the Democratic Party should be moving toward that we haven't done yet? That I assume from your work in like combating domestic terrorism, one of the things that's so interesting is that they're narrative builders, right? Like they are telling a very elaborate and sophisticated and compelling story of their version of America that would get people to radically buy into this idea of whether it's violence or brotherhood or whatever sort of militia forming is happening that would incite them to action. Like that's a narrative exercise, and they're communicating in pretty sophisticated ways across platform. Like how would your experience with that apply to what you think the DNC should be doing? Yeah. So, I mean, I hate to answer a question with sort of like a non-answer here, but I think I could come up with and pull from the recesses of my brain based on my background and experience and say, this is what the Democratic Party should be. This is what our narrative should be and how we promote it and the tactics we use to do so. I think that's where our conversation starts. We need to have that soul-searching conversation across the party to figure that exact point out. I don't have all the answers, but I know that people who do from across the country who have been working not only in this campaign, but for ages on, bringing in people to have that kind of discussion. So one of the things that I would be promoting, you know, if I were to become DNC chair, is we need to put together a couple of things. One, we need to do sort of like a deep dive on what happened just now, but not just now, but we need to have the hard conversation. We were talking about the trajectory of how we've been losing folks. How do we look at that? Because we're not going to be able to build a stronger foundation unless where we know it's weak, where we've made mistakes, and have that conversation, period. So, and part of that is discovering what that narrative is. And so while you may have an individual like me or other candidates who are running give you their 2 cents, I think it's a bit disingenuous for me to come over and say, this is what I think it should be, to where others haven't had a chance at the table to say what their perspectives are.
Very good point.
So I think that needs to happen. And then we got to start thinking long term. So, and I know it comes with the Dean strategy, then that's where I'll start the 50-state strategy.
Yeah.
But like, sure, that's nice. But we need to be more strategic on it. Sure, it should include all 50 states. It should include all the territories. And people are forgetting about D.C. D.C. life here is going to become very interesting because the federal government has a lot of say in what they do here. And so building that political power is even more essential for, you know, D.C. Come on, 51st state, if that ever happens.
Yes.
And so that needs to be inclusive. But we need to look long term. I think we're too used to looking at things by cycles. I think we need to look at things like 50-year outlook. And people may balk at that and be like, 50 years, you're crazy. Well, look what the Republicans did.
Yeah.
You know, with Dobbs. That was a 50-year plan. It was executed pretty phenomenally. It worked.
Yeah.
You know, if you go even further back, you know, and this is maybe a deep cut, you know, you look at FDR and what he put in place, Reaganomics and everything, 50-year plan, did all of that. And then, like, at least from my perspective, from a national security standpoint, our adversaries don't think in these short amount of sort of time spans. You know, they think in like 100-year plans and various other things. That's a bit extreme, but I think we need to really have that maintained outlook on, like, what are we doing, who do we want to be, and where do we see ourselves in the future. And if we're only planning 8 or maybe 4 years ahead, we're not going to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's too quick. All right. So there's 488 people who vote for something like that, give or take.
You need a round number, 450.
450 voters for the DNC. Do you have a natural constituency of the people who are able to vote for chair?
Other than the Latino Jews.
Right, of which I'm sure there's a huge amount.
So many.
Yeah. No, it's a sizable block. So, I mean, yes, I mean, there's definitely an affinity to the various caucuses that are out there, like you mentioned. There is, you know, the Latino caucus.
Yes.
There is the Native caucus.
Labor.
There is labor. And so, like, that's one thing. So I look forward to having those discussions with folks. And, you know, naturally, that's for me is a comfort point, and that's, you know, where my reference is. But, like, another thing I'll throw in there, too, and these folks get very little attention, are those, there is a rural caucus. And so if we're looking at the returns from November, we got demolished when it comes to rural communities. And again, going back to what I was talking about, it's not segmenting folks out. I mean, working family values with rural communities are pretty much the same, where you're looking out for the family farmer. You're trying to fight against vertical integration. You're trying to fight against the corporates like Monsanto and stuff of that sort. And you're fighting for the subsidies that are going to keep these family farms alive, whether it be ethanol, meat packing, et cetera. As you could tell, I've had these conversations before, and this goes back to rural organizing in 2002 and then some. But talk about a forgotten sort of electorate, you know, and some of the things that I would hear as a campaign organizer is like, nah, they're not with us.
Yeah.
Or even worse, and this makes my blood boil, it's too hard to organize. They're just too far out there. It's going to take too much time. And we just don't have the manpower to do it, so we'll just send them direct mail. And maybe we'll get on the radio waves. And you're like, no. Like, I've done it. I've been there. And I had a poor beat-up car that nearly died. But, you know, knocking a whole entire town of like 1,000 people, it can be done.
Yeah.
And those are folks who are asking these very same questions. They're looking for help, and they've been screaming. We necessarily have not been listening. And then, you know, that's where these things start from an organizing perspective. You got to start somewhere, and then you got to build from the grassroots up. So yes, I think I have those affinity sort of groups I could look into. And there is a bit of comfort, but I just don't want to keep the conversation amongst them. And even those who, say, for instance, may be with other candidates right now, I still want to have a discussion.
Yeah.
And I think my big thing is yes, I do want to be party chair, but I think even more importantly than that is we got to have this conversation now.
Agreed.
And so what I'm asking for members and those who want to get involved, I just want to be part of the process. I want to be heard. I want to make sure that others are heard, and this conversation goes in a productive way to where we can have that rebuilding conversation and reimagine what we're doing as a party. So that's pretty much it. They get a bit wonky. There's petitions going around that people need to sign to say, hey, I want this person on the ballot right now. And being having an organizing action, I'm going to be reaching out. My team's going to be reaching out. When I'm asking for you, for members to take action, sign that petition. Sign that petition for me. And then we can keep this conversation going. If you like what I'm saying even further, sign that petition, but then also give if you can. And that goes to everybody here. And then if I hit that plateau that I need to have that, be viable even further, then let's go for broke. Game on. But I think that's the biggest thing is like, if I can be that person to push that conversation to, wake us up out of our slumber right now, then let's do it. Let's go for it.
I got a couple more questions. I'm trying to figure out how to do it in a way that feels like a natural segue, but I don't think it's going to happen. The corporatization of the Democratic Party.
Oh, wow.
Let's go. The DNC chairs, one of the primary responsibilities of the DNC chair is to raise a shit ton of money.
That's right.
It's kind of that's the game, right? And if you raise a shit ton of money, you're going to keep all these state Democratic parties happy. They're going to get some money. Everyone's happy when people have money. But how we get this money ends up becoming, speaking of the rot that we're describing, ends up becoming the problem. I saw that Congresswoman Jayapal Maxwell Frost, the Progressive Caucus, put together a manifesto of sorts. What is your take on it? Will you sign their demands? I mean, I guess they want to get out super PACs in Democratic primaries. They want to get out corporate money. There was a moment where the DNC refused to take corporate money.
Yep.
How long did that last? I think it lasted like a year and a half. It's during the Obama years, right?
Yep.
Obama wanted, the other
Fell
thing we
apart
forget
during re-election, I think.
The other thing we forget about the Obama years, man, Obama ran against lobbyists.
Yes.
Do you remember the era where we couldn't do meetings at the White House with lobbyists? He wanted transparency. He wanted corporate money out of the Democratic Party. All of that stuff lasted a minute. What is your take on this? Is this something that is central to your candidacy? How important is it to you?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think one of the things is, sure, let me put it this way, and I'm going to think about this for a second. One of the lessons that I learned, so I went to the Naval War College as well, and learned about national security and counterterrorism, but they also teach you about battle planning.
That's really cool.
Yeah,
I love this.
One of the adages that
You're
comes...
firing Twigg up.
I know. I'm just like, wait, how did you get to go there?
Yeah.
Naval War
Yeah.
College.
The Naval War College.
Let's
United
go.
States Naval War College. Hoo-yah. So an adage that comes out of my lessons there is in battle planning. And the adage is, if you find yourself in a fair fight, you've done something wrong.
Because there's no such thing.
There's no such thing as a fair fight. Because then you don't know what the outcome's going to be.
True. So
I think this is a complex area. One, I think, the real guns need to be pointed out at citizens and dealing with election reform and money in politics, period.
Yes.
However, we need to be careful, too, about tying potentially one arm behind our back.
Sure.
Granted, if there's a blanket statement that all corporates are evil, granted, maybe there's some validity to that. Yeah. Because they're looking out for their self-interests, and corporates are not people.
Right.
So there's two ways to go about this. And I think one of the lessons that we learned also through this cycle is people, not corporates, people give.
Yep.
And one of the things that I learned in union organizing too, when I was working to build political power through members, and this is interesting. It's the members who make the least give the most.
Yep.
And because they do that, because they know what the union is fighting for, and how it's protecting their livelihood. And so if we can go back to that same sort of mentality, there is a way to where we can raise substantial sums from the grassroots and people. There is donor fatigue right now, and that is real. But we need to show a couple of things. One, we need to show better where people's investment is going.
Yep.
We also need to be responsible on showing them what the outcomes are. And then we need to be transparent on, like, if we did make a mistake on certain things or something didn't work out, we need to fess up to it. And then that, and doing it in a sustainable way, not just like, hey, money, I need money now, but doing it in a sustainable way like we have done in labor reoccurring contributions,
Yeah.
making sure that there's actually building, providing briefings and insight to people on what this is actually building and how they're a part of it. In many cases, the donor class right now, very transactional. Oh, what do you need from me? A check? Okay, I'll see you in 4 years. There's no other involvement than that. And so, yes, you have your major bundlers, you have those who have those relationships with corporate and corporate entities. Okay, that's part of the ecosystem. I'm not sure we can completely cut that out. Direct corporate spending and giving, that's tricky. And I'm not sure I have a cut and dry answer on sort of like no corporate money whatsoever. But the track record, I mean, it's not great. But I think that we shouldn't lose sight on the fact that we raised, what is it, $1 billion?
I mean, $2.5 billion were
billion?
spent on our side across the campaign and all the PACs.
Right.
So
The money's
we
there.
lost.
The money's there. I guess that's my point. What would be interesting to see, and I think we're still figuring out, what percentage of that money came from individuals
Yep.
and bundlers and non-corporate money and
Yeah.
PACs versus, the other side.
Yeah.
I don't know what those numbers are, but I wouldn't be surprised if non-corporate, non-PAC giving actually outweighed.
Well, it's the thing that we forget, right? I mean, I think that we still to this day we've not resolved our trauma from the Bernie Hillary campaign as a party.
Mm-hmm.
I still think that that's true. And I think that because of that, Donald Trump has won twice. I think that the lack of the Democratic Party engaging the Bernie constituency, they were all low-hanging fruit for Trump, in my humble opinion. But with that said, the thing about Bernie Sanders, the Democratic Party can learn a lot from, is his stance in saying, I'm not going to take a single fucking dollar from rich people and from corporations. I'm not even going to do fundraisers. Inspires a lot of people to be like, shit, I got to give Bernie a couple dollars, because what you're saying then is I'm beholden to you. Fuck all these motherfuckers. And even if Bernie, and the other crazy thing about it is when Bernie was saying it, it's not like he was going to get money from corporates.
Yeah. They weren't bending over backwards to give.
It was a very easy thing for him to say.
Exxon was like, dang, man.
Bernie knows his audience.
So it's not like he was going to like get a bunch of bundlers to raise money for him. So it was a strategic thing for him to say that. He ended up raising more, if not more, money than Hillary Clinton. Pretty close, over that race. There are just more people. And I think that the Democratic Party, I will just say this as a casual observer, I think the whole function of it, even this chair race, nothing against this chair race, but even just the race itself is kind of bullshit. It's a bunch of, it's like 400 to 500, people. And God bless them. They're the ones fighting the fights. They're the ones, I don't want to cast any stones against them. But the campaign itself does not let the average person in a way.
Agreed. Agreed.
And that's the reason why.
I don't know that the average person's banging down the door to participate in this campaign, Brad.
But we were to, this is my point though, Twig, right? Like, the more that we can invite people in, the more that we can allow everyday people to be a part of the process. Do you know what I mean? The more that people feel like, oh, actually the Democratic Party, I do get a say in who the DNC chair is. And I mean, one of the things I would say is like there should be reform. I think that there should be more people voting in the DNC chair race than just these 400 people.
Sure.
Right? Number one. And number two, I think that the structure of the campaign apparatus, the thing that we keep hearing about in the dissections of what went wrong was the people that President Biden and VP Harris were listening to the most were the bundlers, were the people who were holding these purse strings, right? And they exert so much control over messaging, what we're going to do, what we're not going to do, how we're going to talk about, again, when we say, why aren't we talking about working class people, is because we have ceded so much power to very rich, powerful people And that ends up becoming the agenda of the Democratic Party.
Well,
and so
I want to interrupt that line of thinking.
Yeah.
I'm going on my Bernie rant.
A little bit. I think that's partially true in that we have avoided conflicts around collective bargaining. We've avoided conflicts around drawing attention to people who've been supportive of Democrats from corporate spaces and then not vociferously and like as aggressively supporting working class people as we possibly could. But I think what's actually hugely responsible for like the divorce of Democrats from their ability to communicate and message effectively is our over-reliance on message testing, on analytics, we have like taken the soul out of our communications infrastructure, and we have completely kind of diminished the role of intuition.
Yes.
Right? We have so many extraordinary communicators who are intuitive, like say what you want about Donald Trump. He intuitively is an extraordinary communicator. He has like a sense and a feel. Same with Bill Clinton.
He focus groups every single thing.
Obviously, everything's thought through. But so yes, I think there is a degree of compromise that we have made around corporatization. You know, I love that rant, but I also think that we have yet to figure out a happy marriage between quantitative and qualitative assessment.
It's a good call.
So I think, I mean, that goes into, you know, the way I see it, like the political landscape has completely shifted. It is different. And the tactics that we are using as a party, I mean, granted, everybody who got out knocked doors and, you know, we heard fantastic stories coming out of, you know, battleground states where millions of doors were being knocked and influxes where people were mobilizing. Like, that's great. And that was meaningful work. However, are those tactics still working? And this pains me to say, as an organizer and a field
Nate,
person.
I brought it up all the time. I kept bringing up because we kept bringing up that data point. I'm like, but
who cares?
I will say this: field as we know it is dead.
Yeah,
and I mean, just look.
Don't tell John Carson that.
I know. I'm sorry, John. I know. I mean, he's in dealing with solar a world right now, so I'm sorry. But that goes into sort of reimagining.
Yeah.
How we redefine the relationships with voters. So like there's two anecdotes I want to share. So looking at data and just looking at the environment that we communicate in some cases, you know, we're all on group chats, we're all on whether it's WhatsApp or, you know, whatever. In some cases, those are more effective maybe now than actually canvassing your neighborhood.
Totally.
Yes.
However, that doesn't take away though the interpersonal relationships that we need. So the key data point that I take away from all the massive like mobilization that we saw in the States just, you know, in November is like, out of those millions of doors knocked, of the people who were knocking them, how many of those people were actually from that block of that house that they were knocking on?
Ding, ding, ding.
You know?
100%.
And that goes back to old school, you know, shoe leather organizing, where it's just like, hey, we need to rebuild that infrastructure, and it's going to have different bells and whistles for sure. But it's that human relationship that still remains at its core. And then going into the corporate polish of things. So going back to Arizona, there is a guy down there who showed me, and he deals with analytics when it comes to social media and things of that sort. And again, we like to put out like a very corporate finished product. It has the Obama flair on it, you know, and it's like, it's slick, it's well produced, it's crisp, and we push it out there and we're like, this is just awesome. And you know what it looks like? An ad.
Yeah.
You know,
because it is.
But at the same time too, what he showed me was, and I forget which Republican candidate it was, I think it was out in Florida, had this really sort of like not well produced, but very organic kind of
like
sloppy
iPhone video.
iPhone video. And it's got, you know, GIFs that are moving down and like, you know, eagles that are soaring by with American flag in the back. And like, it's got some really crappy background music and you can hear the guy, but it's just like not well mixed. And you look at it and the knee-jerk reaction, I think, from the party and the party professionals and the consultant class is like, haha, look at that. That's junk. Like, that's not going to go where. Nobody's going to pay attention to that. That guy made that in 10 minutes, and it looks like an 8th grader made it. One of the most viral, clicked on, like, influence and forwarded videos in the state.
Yes.
And that goes back to us when we're talking about grassroots organizing, sort of like the DIY culture. of like, hey, if I don't have this, I'm going to make it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, we all come from, when you're getting that, those volunteers or folks in the community are banging down your door in the field office, it's like, where's my sign? And I was like, I got no signs. Go knock doors. But then you're like, okay, well, what are we going to do instead to satiate that need? We're going to have like a sign making party. We're going to have those in rural areas paint on their barns their own barn signs. Yeah. And you know what, it's got that level of authenticity, and it's got that grassroots feel to where it's like, sure, I can give you like a hot off the press yard sign, but if you made something and put in your yard, or even if you put something online that you created yourself, like, we need to start thinking in those terms and reimagining what those tactics are and redefining what relationships are and how we talk to voters, and even more importantly, how they talk to us. Because right now, the ways that we're doing things, door knocking, I love it. Phone banking, well, that's another thing.
Sure.
You run through the scripts and you're dialing up for 2 hours, and maybe you've talked to maybe 4 people.
There's a new way to do it.
There's a new way to do it.
There's got to be and text banking, I don't think, is the answer because that was another metric of success that a lot of groups are pointing to. It's like, oh, we texted 5 million people. It's like, bro, that is just spam.
That's just spam.
You know what I mean? Like, that is not true voter engagement. I don't know how much more time we have with you.
Let's wrap this up. Well, you've been incredibly generous. You're
so generous with your time. Because it goes back to, and this is something Twigg and I have been talking about all the time, right? Which is, I think that we as humans are very good. We're very resilient people. We're very resilient, sentient life forms. Like, we'll just roll with whatever is happening, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that's how Trump has won twice. I think we just keep rolling. We're just like, yeah, all right, Trump's our president again. It's fine. But I agree with you. I think that this is going to be a fucking disaster. What he is going to try to attempt to do, and you could kind of just like lay out whether it's, getting rid of departments and agencies, whether it's defunding NIH, whether it's deporting millions of people, separating families, ending birthright citizenship. Like, you can just go down the list of things.
Yeah.
You are positioning yourself, which is, I think, really compelling. Someone's like, I understand how to manage crises. And the Democratic Party has to walk and chew gum, has to do a lot of things at once. Because this is a worry that you and I had. We're like, how are we, because we're very good at like, oh, the house is on fire. Let's all organize and let's protect the house, right? If you think back to Trump before, like, the Muslim ban, let's all go to the airports and, like, support the ACLU and do all this work. How do you see this working? Like, we'll use mass deportations as an example.
Okay.
That is a crisis. What, with your background, like, how should the Democratic Party create an information portal, protect communities, educate people on what the fuck is happening and what they can do, while also simultaneously building the brand of the Democratic Party? Brand. You know what I mean? Like, how does all of this stuff fit in,
So I think, answering that in reverse is sort of like the branding. If we're fighting, if we're showing up, if we're organizing, but also building that infrastructure that's going to be sustainable. Yeah. Just showing up and fighting is, part of the narrative and the branding of who we are, as opposed to like, we're just going to jump fire to fire. Like, if we're going to fight this thing, it's not just going to be mass deportation. This is going to be everything else that you mentioned. Yeah. And we're going to be in the fight of our lives for the next 4 years on dealing with this. And so, sure, organizing is a big part of it, making sure that the DNC is rooted out of the Beltway and actually has a presence in the states and where these fights are happening on the ground needs to happen. The DNC needs to provide the support, the guidance, the information that's going to be able to bring clarity to these arguments to people. And look, it's not going to be like the DNC is going to build like a whole entire brand new sort of like war room although that would be cool. But we got to really look at it at those who are on the front lines and what they need.
Yeah.
You're talking about teachers. You're talking about coaches. You're talking about parents. You're talking about relatives. And these are the folks that we saw during the last Trump administration who would show up at the airports, who would lobby, local legislators. The DNC needs to give all those folks the resources that they need, not only to have that fight, but also introduce people that this is a fight that they themselves can do. Because right now it's sort of very existential where it's like, okay, the people in the know can fight. There's not much that I can do. I'm just going to watch this unravel on cable TV. But if the DNC is out there, and it doesn't mean that the DNC needs to have like a major flag that we're waving, like DNC has showed up, word, Instead, it's more like empowering the local parties, empowering those local legislators who have those connections in the communities to be able to not only empower them to come to the fight, but also to take and make it more accessible to others. I think that's one of the things that people are now very concerned about, not just within the party, but just the general public in general. It's like, look, I see these things happening in my neighborhood. I see books being banned. I heard kids being bullied. I don't like this, but there's nothing I can do. They're going to have their fights. We're going to see it on TV. But if the DNC can come in and give the resources to local parties, to allied organizations, to labor, to
what does that mean, though? I don't know what that means. As someone I've been a state party staffer, I've been a DNC staffer, I've been a labor union, I've been a White House person. I don't know what you mean. How does the DNC empower a local state rep to participate in a fight in their neighborhood? Like, what's that chain? Because if I'm an elected official in my neighborhood, I don't need the DNC to tell me something to do in my own town. Like, what you're going to give me information that I can get on the internet from Googling? Like, what does that mean?
So, reliable information. I think that's one of the things that we need to be careful of. We all do it. We'll go to Google and we'll research something, and not necessarily is that always sort of like reliable, accountable information. So I think that can be supplied to parties. When it comes to funding, yes, I mean, let's not like get away from this. The DNC is still a major vehicle for funding. And so some of the conversations that I had in Arizona were pretty eye-opening on the lack of funding that state parties get. And so, yes, it needs to be taking that donor apparatus, adding accountability and transparency to it, but also realigning what the requirements are, where these donations and where the funding needs to go. And that comes down to listening to those who are on the ground having that fight on saying, you know what I don't need is a polished ad. You know what I do need? Something simple as like some funding for materials that I can use to organize people. You know what I need? I need, some server space that I can actually create something to where I can have these conversations. You know what I need? Talking about server space, we are growing in leaps and bounds because we're doing all this work. And cybersecurity infrastructure, I don't have a way to pay for it. And then as far as staffers and people who are doing the work to coordinate this fight on the ground, in some cases, what I heard is, what they're getting from the DNC, regularly, about $17,000 for a state party. You can't even pay for an intern with that amount of money. And let alone, you're going to have some coordinator who's doing this stuff on their time. And given the fact, too, a lot of people who are in this fight, they're volunteering. Okay, a lot of the things that are happening at the state party level are run by volunteers, and there are not many actual party chair officials or likes that are actually paid full-time on what they're doing.
Right.
And so the DNC, yes, we can come in, we can fund that to an extent, and obviously empower them to figure out where they're going to be able to stretch that dollar the most and where it can go. What we shouldn't be doing is having the DNC being that long screwdriver from DC trying to fix things and telling people what to do. Again, this goes back to our principles on organizing. We need to listen what those requirements are. They know what they are. They know their communities. And then we need to then share that with funders and donors and say, this is what we need. This is what, say, for instance, Texas needs, what border cities need, and this is what we need to do. And right now, it's just sort of the cattle call comes out. We need ads. We need to have more points on TV, and various other things. So a lot of this really isn't sexy. It's going down to basic blocking and tackling, nuts and bolts, and then figuring out what those needs are and making sure that we can fund towards that, and then taking those successes and sharing them across the states. And that's another thing that I think the DNC can do better, is you'll hear about great successes, say, for instance, in Washington State.
Yeah.
I believe that that's a state where
they are crushing
they went blue.
Yeah.
They made legislative gains.
Yes.
And I think I need to look at the data of this. I believe that's the one state that actually got bluer.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're also the most diverse caucus. The number of AAPI elected officials in Washington State, it's crazy.
So granted,
it's great.
We need to be careful because there aren't cookie cutter solutions here, and nor should there be. But like, what's the conversation or platform that's been given to those who led that fight in Washington State and learning from the practices, the funding practices, the tactics, the conversations, the relationships, the online, the information, how they fought disinformation? How is that being shared? I don't think it is. And I think Washington State and the people who had that fight, they would relish the opportunity to have a platform to share that, say, for instance, talk about Jersey. Jersey had a rough go of it.
We really did.
But things of that
It's been a
sort.
rough year for New Jersey.
Yeah.
Our New York Giants, our New York Jets. It's been really rough, Nate. It's been really rough. This has been awesome, man. So what's next? Tell us. So how many days until a DNC chair is announced? I don't know the mechanics.
Yeah.
It's like 50 some odd days.
50
right?
some days.
Yeah.
Okay.
February 1st is when the vote's going to happen.
February 1st. Okay.
Between now and then, there will be a number of candidate forums.
Great.
To where we'll be able to talk to members and things of that. The thing that's right around the corner, which is this Thursday, is I believe the Rules Committee meeting to where they're determining the threshold for viability.
Great.
So how many signatures you need to get on a petition and when that's due. And then in the meantime, it's just conversation after conversation. Yeah. And one of the things that I'm hoping to do, to your point, this is a very insular process.
Yeah.
And one of the things that, I think having that conversation with Arizona, and like you guys are on the front lines, preserve and fight for our democracy. I think within the Democratic Party, that decision, not saying the DNC is going to be like the sole player in that. It's going to be a major player in having that fight. But that decision is being whittled down to 450 people.
Yeah.
So I would say to people who want to get involved, get involved. And the way you can do that, and, this is going to be a pitch, obviously.
Yeah.
Go to natefordnc.org. Sign up.
Let's go.
I'm on all the socials as Real Nate Snyder. We're just starting a conversation here. We're doing our best to show people, what we're doing, what our messaging is, but also how they can be part of the conversation. Because here's the thing. A lot of people have a lot of relationships, and you may know a DNC member, and I'm not saying that we're going to spam people because that's annoying and we all hate it. But look, if you have the ability to reach out, or, you've had the ability to have a conversation with your state party, we want to give you the information on how to have that conversation and give you the tools potentially to do it. But also just to get involved. I think as people are giving, and that's another thing, would love people to give. We're trying to do our best to make sure that we're listening so that we can also carry their messages to the platforms that we're now being in front of, whether it has to do with working families, whether it has to do with certain affinity group, things and things of that sort. So come one, come all.
I love it, Nate.
Organize. We've
been hearing, because Twigg and I get DMs or texts from folks, and I think obviously after Trump won again, there was a flurry of like, what do we do now? Mm-hmm. What can I do? And you bring up a very good point, which is I don't think that people realize that in their hometowns, their local state Democratic Party is mostly run by volunteers.
Depends on the state.
It depends on the state.
It's about half and half.
Half and half. Okay, you're from Ohio, which is like a...
But like we haven't been a battleground state in a decade, but our chair's paid. The Ohio Democratic Party is actually quite well funded. This is the thing. A lot of these states, because people care about governor's races, they care about state-wide races, they care about the federal races that are happening in the states, they have their own donor pools. I mean, yes, it's important that the DNC contribute to the budgets of state parties, but most maybe not Oklahoma, but like Ohio, Washington, Texas, Nevada, Arizona, all these states are raising millions of dollars independently to fund their own priorities and to keep lasting infrastructure cycle to cycle. again, doesn't mean the DNC doesn't have an important role to play. And particularly, one of the things that you said that I think is really compelling is paying for a lot of the technical infrastructure of the party. So making sure that there's access to analytics, there's access to important data, that there's economies of scale around media purchases, around computers, around sort of all that sort of tech back end stuff that actually allows you to operate. And so some parties are volunteer, but many aren't.
I was just going to say, good point. Sorry, Twigg. I was just going to say, this is a really great entry point for people who are like, I don't know how to get involved. I think following this, getting to know there's like 5 candidates that are out there now, researching, getting to know who they are, and then also just calling up your state Democratic Party. You know, like, honestly, it sounds crazy. I give this advice all the time for people who are like, I want to learn how to get into politics. I'm like, yo, there's someone running for office anywhere.
There's also county parties. There's also city parties.
Yeah.
There's also,
Totally.
elected officials that are always looking for time, talent, treasure, money. Like, there's so many different avenues to get involved, for sure. This has been so great. Thank you so much, Nate.
You did it,
Yeah,
Nate.
sorry
really
about that
appreciate
phone buzzing.
No, it's fine.
Thank you for coming. And we may have you back, bro. We'll see.
I would love to come back.
We'll see.
Keep you guys, updated on how things are going.
And feel free to text any gossip.
Oh, yeah. We're
all
full of gossip.
It is my favorite thing about this podcast now is I get so much more gossip than I used to. Because people are like, hey, you know something you should mention on the podcast? So-and-so did so-and-so. And I'm like, delicious. This is fantastic.
Yeah. But no, this is great.
We're here for it.
Yeah. Just having this conversation, I think, is key. And just getting out there.
So it's Nate Snyder for DNC.com. Is that right?
Nate for DNC.
Totally wrong.
.org.
.org.
And .com. Either way, either one will work. But yeah, we got both domains. So
God bless.
.org, .com. It's how you're feeling in the day.
God bless.
Yep. All right. Go get them.
Peace, y'all.